Hi everyone, Evan Alexander here with another Cinema 4D tutorial. I made a tutorial last week about bringing Vectorworks objects into Cinema 4D, and we talked a lot in that video about how symbols get converted into instances in Cinema 4D. And then I got a bunch of emails saying, what the hell is an instance? and, and how does that work? So I thought, all right, maybe we should do a little video on this and just explain, because instances and cloning and repetition and duplication in Cinema 4D is great. And it works a little differently than what you're kind of used to with Vectorworks with symbols, but it's just as powerful. And the two actually work really well together. So we're going unscripted today, so I'll try not to meander too much. I do want to just throw a quick disclaimer in here to say that, I'm happy to be doing Cinema 4D tutorials. I don't think these tutorials are going to be like how to learn Cinema 4D from the ground up. There's a million tutorials out there already that do this and probably do it better than I could. And so, hit YouTube, look at, there's some great sites like Grayscale Gorilla, Nick Campbell and Chad there have been making amazing tutorials for years. And Chris Schmidt is another big player, also EJ Hasselfrantz, I think, if I'm saying that right. His group is called iDesign, and he's also with the School of Motion. But also just, Cinema 4D 101 inside of YouTube search, and you've got hours of content there. Okay, so this is going to be focused more on production design and, assuming that you've kind of noodled around a little bit in Cinema 4D and you just want to improve your skills. So, all right, end of lecture. Let's jump in. So I'm in Cinema 4D release 25 here, and I have a cube. Very exciting. So this is just a lone piece of geometry sitting here. So let's make an instance of this. So we'll just start slow here, and then we'll start to relate this to scenery and lighting and other things. So I'm going to select the cube in the object manager. I'm going to come down to it's this stack of generators here. Subdivision surfaces on the top. You can see there's a little arrow there. That means if you click and hold, there's a whole other menu kind of hidden underneath here. And what we're looking for here is instance. Okay. I use this so much actually that I've actually built the button right into my workspace. And so again, you can Google that too. Maybe I'll do a video on that later, how to customize your workspace. But for now, I'll just stick with what you probably have here. So we'll come down and we'll say instance. And now we have cube instance. It looks surely like nothing has happened here, but you'll see, here we go. Now we have an instance of the cube. So you have to think of this kind of like symbols inside of Vectorworks, okay? So the instance is referring to, it has a reference object, which is back to our cube. So if I make changes to what I call the master here, then those changes are going to reflect through into these instances. But instances can be placed wherever you want, and they can be rotated other ways, which is very handy. And they can be scaled, though not by actually using the scale handles. So we'll talk about that because it's a little bit different, but it's pretty rare that I scale instances, but it's also pretty rare that I scale symbols in Vectorworks, but it can be done. And then, you can just keep making copies of this. So really the idea is very similar to symbols. And so if I were to, put a texture on this here, we'll just make this screaming big color. And then that's going to carry through to all of the instances of this as well. And so you can see here in the reference object here, it's referring back to this original cube. So like I say, it really is like symbols. Here's one of the main differences. With symbols in Vectorworks, you can grab any of these and edit them, and all the symbols will update. In Cinema, we really just have one master, and then there are all these other, kinds of versions of it. So it does mean that really any work that you do here is going to happen only to this kind of one master. Now, you can make more complex assemblies here. So let's say we have something like this now. And so, all right, so this is our piece of scenery. This is a child here, or I could grab these, and if I hit Alt-G and group these. So let's, we'll call this platform 1. And so now I've got this larger, folder, this null with sub objects inside of it. Now I can instance this as well. And so then you can see here, so it can be more than one object. It can be a whole assembly, or, hundreds of objects even if you want. So it doesn't really matter to Cinema what it is. Now, I'll note that inside of the attributes for the instance, there are different modes between instance and render instance and multi-instance. And you should do a little reading about that. Here is the help menu, just right here from help. And so you should read about the instance object here. If you come down to object properties, it's going to come through here and it's going to show you here the instance mode. So here's instance, render instance, and then somewhere down here is multi-instance. So definitely dig into this a little bit. I don't want to spend the time today to explain it, but I'll just tell you my kind of hard and fast rule is for 99.9% of the things that I do, I want this to be a render instance. And the advantage is that now I can have duplicates of this, but it doesn't actually count and load the geometry into, kind of the processing power and the file size of what's needed. So if I have 600 moving lights, if I have 400 chairs in the audience, then making these render instances is going to make it so much easier for Cinema to kind of work with. Also, it gives me that control over these objects so that if I need to make a change, I can do this once and it will all update. If I need to, do more kind of advanced texturing, then I can do this, once and it will play out into all of those symbols, okay? Or instances. I'm going to say symbols for instances and instances for symbols all day already, I can tell. So this is really cool, right? This is great. And I'm sure you can already see a million different uses of this, right? You have a table with 6 chairs around it. You only need one model of the chair, and then you can, you can just instance it all you want, and you're going to save time and overhead and make things easier to update. So who doesn't love all of those things? All right. So let's look now at the cloner object, which is similar to instances, but is a different kind of tool that works in a more powerful kind of way here. So I'm going to jump over here. I have seen here. So I just have this one little Roby light sitting in here. It's sitting on the ground and it has its C-clamps. Oops. Sorry, everybody. And so this is really simple. I just have the base as one object, and then the yoke here as another object. And then, whoops, let me screw everything up. And then what I call the head, or what some people call the body of the light. And then, whoop, right up here at the top, we just have the lens. And so I've set these up in this kind of parent-child relationship. And I've made sure when I come in here that the axes is right kind of where I want it for each of these, so that if we were to take the yoke here and rotate it, then you can see that the head and the lens kind of come along with it, just like a moving light. Crazy. Or we can rotate and tilt the head here. So I like to keep it really simple like this. So there you go. We're not here to talk about light rigging, but just so you understand what's happening here. All of this then is inside of one big null folder, right? So I've got all the different geometry. I can keep working it, but if I instance this, right? So if we just instance this and move it over, then right now we have a secondary light, and anything that we do to this light is going to happen to this other light as well. So that's great. But if you now need a lot of these, then we can start to get into the cloner tool. So I'm going to select this. So I'm going to come right here. It's this weird icon that looks like, I guess it's a cube with green dots on every corner. So I'm just going to add a cloner object here. And nothing's happened yet, because what we need to do is we need to take our geometry and we need to make it a child of the cloner. And when we do that, you're going to see by default right away that I'm getting, well, it looks like now I have 9 moving lights. So you have to think of the cloner as working with symbols and duplicate array inside of Vectorworks at the same time. But it's live and parametric, and so you can come in here and keep updating all of this stuff. So this is really cool. It's a really deep tool, but it's worth getting to know, because anytime you're making duplicates in Cinema, this is kind of a great way to do it. Just to kind of overview this real quick for you. So the mode, there are different kinds of clones that we can do. It defaults here to grid, but there's also object, linear, radial, honeycomb. So depending on your application, different things will kind of come into play. And so now this grid is telling me that in X here, right, left to right, it's making 3 copies. In Y, the vertical, it's making 1 copy. And then in Z, the depth, it's making 3 copies. And then I can also adjust kind of the spacing of these laid out. And we can, add more and kind of up these numbers. So this is really cool, right? You can start to see already. If you're doing seating layout, this might be your new best friend, right? Cool. So what else here? So right now, I'm working with what's called per step mode. And so what that means is, actually, you know what? No, all right, we'll keep going. So I am spacing out X here by, let's just say 70 inches. So, right, from center of this light to center of this light, right, these rows is 70 inches. And so every time I add another light, I'm adding more width to this by, 70 inches every time we kind of add one. If I were to change this from per step to end point, what that means is that now this is calculating the distance from the far left one to the far right. And that's not going to change. But as we add more, it's going to kind of fill in between and space them out. And I can adjust this. So it just depends on what you're doing and, how you need to approach it, or, maybe how your brain works. You can also grab these, there are these yellow dots out here. So you can actually just visually kind of slide these through, or you can scrub here, or you can just double click on this and type in, here's 500 inches subdivided by 12. So this is really, really cool, because, you can start to really just add in all kinds of really complex systems here. Whoops, don't do that. Let's see, how about 120? Yeah. Crazy. That's a lot of lights. We don't need that many lights. There we go. So now it's pretty rare that I'm going to do lights in a grid here. So let's look at some of these other modes. Also, before we talked about instance, render instance, and multi-instance. And here you go. Inside of the cloner tool, it's also going to let me kind of play around with this. So we'll do render instance for now. That's my kind of usual Maybe we'll take these numbers down a little bit because it's getting a little crazy here. It's just getting a little nuts. You can have so many clones. All right, so we don't want grid anymore. We want linear because this is, kind of our usual go-to here. So I've just changed the mode to linear. And so now it's asking me, again, it by default, it has set this to clone 3 times and it's offset the Y number. And that's okay. We don't really want that. What we want, so we're going to zero this out here, if I can actually hit it. And what we want is we want to clone kind of this way, right? So how much space do you want in between your moving lights, right? Like 4 feet maybe? That seems pretty good. And so then if I just crank up the number here, then I can keep kind of adding more and more of these lights, right? My original geometry is still here. So anything that we do to the master is going to kind of carry through to all of the clones. And so that's really nice. And then, there's some other stuff here we can do. So we have this thing called like rotation, step rotation. So like in between each clone, do you want to kind of start to offset and start to kind of curve things around? So now for curved seating, I mean, if you're trying to do a true circle, then there is like a radial mode, and we'll take a quick look at that. So I wouldn't do that. But if you do want to, start to get into, I mean, you can get into some really complex, if you're trying to put lights on the underside of a roller coaster, I think we've got you covered here. So let's zero these guys out again. So this is cool. I love the cloner tool, and and it remains kind of live, and that's really cool. You can also you can have multiple objects inside of a cloner here. Let's take this down. Whoops. Scale this down a little bit. So now I've got the cube and the Roby light. And so what it's doing is it's basically just alternating between, Roby cube, Roby cube, Roby cube. And if we were to, add in a sphere here, and then it's going to just alternate between, it's going to go in this order and it's just going to keep repeating. But this is great for, if you want to randomize the lights on your truss here, you can, throw in a Roby and then throw in a Sharpie and then throw in a Viper, and, you can just kind of mix it up a little bit in here. So that's great. We love that. Let's get rid of these here. We'll go back to just our fine friend here. And so if we go to radial, then it's going to do, pretty much exactly what you think here. So, I can set a radius. I can set the number of clones here. I can adjust also, whether I'm cloning this kind of vertically or, facing upstage, downstage, or sitting on the floor. So the plane, right, is going to define by using 2 different planes, it's going to define kind of where this is going to sit. So you have to play with this a little bit. You can, of course, just rotate the whole thing around if it's not really doing what you want, but by default you should try to kind of dial in the plane that you want it to be on, which is great. And then now these lights have all kind of pointed in, but imagine I want them pointing out. I'm not even talking about the head. I'm just talking about like the whole body here. So there is a transform tab here. So we've been working in the object tab. If I come over, though, to the transform tab, I can actually, put in angled rotation that will affect all of the clones. So imagine if you want these to be, not top hung, but bottom hung on a pipe position, you can, kind of adjust it that way. You can start to, kind of sidearm stuff out this way. So, transform. You can also transform things, by inches, and probably not the best way to kind of manipulate your stuff here. I choose to just basically move the entire cloner now. But that's okay. And so any of these things are good. So it's good to know here that you can come in and, if this is running kind of backwards for you, you can just flip all this stuff around. So And then, of course, obviously, we still have control here. Now, you'll notice that my original is still kind of sitting here in the middle of this world, and it's kind of hidden. If I turn off the cloner, I can just come back. I have my light here, and so we could work on this, and maybe we want to just like add a basic material to this, and we'll make it black, and we'll make it kind of shiny. And then when I turn the cloner back on, here you go. Everything is kind of carried through. So that's really cool. And, we kind of like love that, right? Let's turn off this work plane getting in our way. So there is also here, grid, which we kind of talked about, and then honeycomb, which, basically works like grid, but it, gives you kind of an offset. Think of this as like a brick pattern. So, this is, maybe for like theatrical seating, this is what you want. And again, you can play with the different planes of this. So I don't use this very often, but we can definitely, kind of use that if you need to. Linear is my kind of go-to. Grid is great too for doing like banks of seating or, kind of banks of lighting. But then there's also this one called object here. So let's take a look. Oh, well, here, before we do that, I'll show you, so kind of in use here. So here's a system. So I just have, so this is just, I'm going to turn these off so we can see what we have here. This is just a 10-foot stick of like 12 by 12 box truss. And it's inside of a cloner, which is set to linear. And I'm on render instances. My count is 5. And my offset is 120 inches, 10 feet. It's a 10-foot stick of truss. So when I turn this on, then what I get here is, here's a 50-foot stick of truss. If we lower this by 1, here's a 40-foot stick of truss. Here's a 60-foot stick of truss, right? You get it. So that's cool. And then as a separate cloner inside of the same folder, then I have this ellipsoidal. So here I've got this little like, kind of low poly source 4 here. That's really simple. But I have this set up as a cloner now. Whoop, where did it go here? Let's jump back to our truss. Here it is. And so this is now a separate clone system also on top of this. And so I've got my lights spaced to a very weird 41 inches here. But by changing this, we can change kind of the spacing, or, like we did before, we could change this from per step to end point. And then, so then we've got our kind of overall length, and then we can add and adjust more lights kind of inside of this. So that's really cool. We love that. And so, now I just have this kind of, prefab system here where I have a truss and I have a bunch of lights already kind of set up to render here. And, it's basically parametric. So if you say, oh, we want to make this, take this up to 50, maybe we'll take this up to 60 feet. And then, let's just kind of dial in a few more lights on here. I've got it still set to just endpoint here, but there you go. And so now we have, whoa, that's way too many. Yeah. If you add 300 lights, you get an X bar. Who knew? There you go. Take this back to 24. Here you go. So, now I've just got this whole assembly saved. And if I need kind of generic source 4 truss, which I don't need very often anymore, but like it's there, drop this into the scene and off you go. You can make these really big runs. Or if I just swap out this light for a different fixture, or if I put multiple fixtures in here, right away I'm kind of populating really quick kind of truss runs in my sketch, which is great. There's a lot of times where I'm working on a set design, a production design, a concert design, and we don't really have the real lighting information yet from the lighting guys or the lighting department. And, so I have to make up a rig. And so this is perfect. So here you go. So let's see here. We'll talk about this guy in a minute. Maybe we need to just make a blank scene. So let's talk about the object tag here. So I'm going to make a cube again here. I'm just going to shrink this down a little bit here. Whoops, what's happening here? Why can't I spin this down here? What's going on? Oh, am I not in... what did I do here? We're in the scale tool. Should be good. I don't know why you're not going to let me scale you. You seem to want to rotate now. Look at this. We've got a nice glitch here. Let's try again here. Let's make a new scene. Let's add a cube. There we go. I don't know what's going on there. Happens to me. It's going to happen to you. It's a bit of a mystery. We want to turn off the work plane and the filter. We don't need that. All right. So let's now add in we'll add in a landscape object here. This is cool. So I'm going to take this cube here and just move it out of the way. Let's make the landscape object kind of bigger so we can see what's going on. This is great. This is just like a little, it's like a little like kind of, whoa, there's a mountain here for us. So here's a little earthscape for us. You can play around with all the different, kind of sizes and heights and play around with that one. Whoop, I keep doing that. It's really fun. And so now I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to stick this into a cloner again. And so now I'm going to so it's set to grid here. So, right, it's doing what we expect, 3 by 3 by 1 here, right? And so I'm going to change this from grid to object. And when you do that, your object totally disappears. Why? Well, right now the cloner is saying, I'm going to clone this related to an object, but I don't have an object to play with. So we want to use the landscape. So I'm literally going to drag the word landscape, and I'm holding the button down, my mouse button down, and I'm going to drag and drop it right here into this field. And so what's going to happen by default is that it's going to be in object mode, and it's going to use the landscape as the object, and it's going to distribute them now along the surface. So you can already start to see the possibilities of this. It's set to a count of 20 by default, so I can up this here. And so all it's doing is it's taking, the center of my object, which is the middle of this cube, and it's just distributing it along the surface of this object. So that's super cool and handy, because if you were doing, trees in a forest or chairs on an uneven surface, or you want to just randomly distribute, debris or, pine cones, anything you can imagine here, you can use this along the surface. And I can come into this transform, and you can see that this is where, this transform can come in handy, because, if things are kind of half sunk in, you might want to kind of lift them up a little bit. And the system remains parametric, right? So I can adjust my cube here and, kind of play around with this scale still, and or, this shape or anything. And I'm using a cube, but this could very easily be a null and a folder full of multiple objects for you. Okay, and so I'm going to go back. I'm going to set this to instance again, make it easier on our processor here. And so this is really cool. And so this is distributing by surface, but you can also distribute by all these different things, like, for example, polygon center. And so this is going to look really dense here for a second. Let's make our cube smaller. It's also a really good way to freak out your computer here. So if I turn off this cloner for a second, and let's just turn on our grid here. So this is the topology of our landscape, right? It defaults to 100 by 100 segments here. And so, we can lower this way down, which, gives us kind of lower resolution, but gives us, less kind of geometry. If I turn this on now, you can see that what's happening is, and let's turn off this transform here because it's confusing things. Now it's just dropping a clone into the center of every polygon. And so that can be really useful for doing, chairs and seating or crowds or, other kind of applications for production design stuff that work that way, really nicely. So that's cool. Polygon centers. Well, you can also do vertices. So everywhere there's a point, it's going to drop one, or edges. So it'll center itself onto every edge. I don't use these very often, but surface is kind of our go-to. Volume is also a really cool one. Let's just make I'm going to make let's say a cone here maybe. Where's cone? Why can't I find you? Right here, cone. And let's drag this over here, and then let's just scale it up like schmooper big here. So imagine that this is this kind of volume of space here, and we want to fill it, right? It's like you're making a snow globe or a gumball machine, and now you want to kind of fill it. So what I can do is I can tell this cloner now I want to clone to the cone. Not to the landscape. Whoops, what's going on here? Oh, that was my selection, excuse me. I meant to do my object here. Our object should be the cone, all right? We don't need the landscape anymore. And so now you can see here, now it's coming along the surface of this object, which is great. What I want to do, though, is I want to set this to volume. Now, it looks like nothing happened. We can actually take the cone at this point and turn it off. We don't actually even need it to be there to see it. And so what's happening here, maybe we'll make this a little bit bigger so that you can see, but if I start to up the number of clones here, you'll see that what it's doing is it's filling the volume of the cone with these objects here. Well, I've made a ton of them now. And you can see now we have this kind of cone made up of these different objects. Did I just make a bajillion of them? Yes, 31,000. There you go. Let's try 5,000. All right. So now you can kind of see it better. If I turn my cone on, you can see that here it is. Now it's not totally staying inside of the cone. It is breaking the outer surface of the cone a little bit, but that's okay. So this is a really great way to kind of fill up volumes of space, inside of kind of hidden geometry. Now, one thing that you have to be careful of with this is that it is overlapping the objects here. Let's take our count down a little bit, so just so we're not kind of freaking the computer out so much here. But I still have this like kind of overlap here. So there's ways that we can kind of get around that a little bit. When you have, let's talk about effectors first, and then we'll talk about the overlap kind of problem. So I've got these in here, but now they're all kind of facing the same direction. Everything is, kind of looking, uniform in its kind of distribution and placement. And maybe we want to randomize this more. So we can use a MoGraph effector here. So I'm going to select the cloner. And while this is selected, I'm going to come up to MoGraph effectors. And there's a whole list of effectors here, but what we're interested in is the random one. So I'm going to just click this. And because I had my cloner selected, it automatically took this random effector and applied it to the cloner. So if we come into the cloner and we come to the very tail end here, effectors, you can see that this random is in here. If I didn't want it anymore, I could get rid of it. Or if I wanted to add this manually, I could just drag this in here. So what's happening here? So by default, you may have noticed when I added this that things kind of jumped a little bit. So by default, it just moves everything in its X, Y, and Z by this kind of random metric converted number here. So, but I can start to really randomize the kind of width or the depth. Now it's not respecting my cone anymore. So, just be aware of that. But you can really, kind of play around with this. So that's one way to, kind of distribute it. I keep just blowing this thing way out. But there's also rotation and scale. So now if we were to come in here and kind of up the randomness of rotation, now you can see that we're really starting to get, kind of these things totally randomized. And you can also, kind of do this with scale too, where you can get, kind of bigger and smaller. So, the possibilities of this are, kind of limitless. It's great. And so for production design, for graphics and kind of MoGraph and different things where, you're making an asteroid field to fly through, you can see how this can be, really handy. In more kind of practical terms here, if I, come back to, say, this guy here, and it looks like, by the way, my ellipsoidals here, it looks like they're just floating. So I'm going to just move the cloner so that it looks more like we're hanging off the truss here, right? So that's good. But now if I come in here to these ellipsoidals, and again, same thing, while this is selected, I'm going to say MoGraph effector random. And so you can see it just makes a huge mess of this, which, we really don't want. Because by default, it's just going to, move all this stuff. Let's zero these out. Now, what's cool is X here. I might want to randomize this on, well, or maybe Z here. No, maybe it's Y. Yeah, it's Y. Things are a little backwards. But here I can just, so, maybe you don't want them perfectly spaced. Maybe you do, but maybe you don't. And so I can randomize this, just like a little bit. And so then, what we start to get here is things are just slightly like not perfect. And same thing with rotation. I might come in here and just got to find the right one. It's always the last one. I can just come in here and, maybe just add like 5 degrees or something really subtle here, or 25 degrees. And so now you can see that, these all just are kind of slightly, it's just less perfect. And this is, this is great. If you're trying to do photorealism, nothing is spaced perfectly, nothing is aligned perfectly. Lights also have cables, but here we are. So so this can be really useful that way. Let's come back here to this guy. Let's turn off random. I want to come back here to, where are we? Here we are. So again, back to this problem of overlapping clones here, and let's maybe up this number again just so you can see. We are really bouncing all over the place today, everybody. So here I've got 2,000 clones, and you can see. So again, I'm going to select the cloner. I'm going to come back to MoGraph effector. Now there is one in here called push apart. And when I do this now, it's going to let me, kind of set some radius to be able to kind of add a little bit of breathing room kind of around my clones. You can see now they'll start to actually push each other out of the way. But if I did this correctly, there shouldn't now be any overlap, though this is maybe a little much. Bring this down. You have to just kind of play with this stuff and dial it in and see, kind of what looks right. But now, I've got things kind of inside this cone shape, but they're not overlapping each other. This is the push apart effector. And you can stack them, so you can have a push apart, and you can also, you could add random to that as well, and, kind of play around with all of these, different parameters inside of here. It's going to take a sec here to probably catch up. I think I might have just freaked it out a little bit. I didn't add the random to it. There we go. So now, right, so you can see, right, so this is great for just building all kinds of multiple assembly objects. And again, it's all, maybe you don't want this to be a sphere, maybe a cube, maybe you want this to be a sphere. Like, great, just swap out the whole system, and there you go, right? We don't really care probably about rotation on a sphere. Whoops. Or you could just kill the whole thing. So super cool, right? And so this idea, this system, is how I keep clicking on it. Here we go. This is how I do my audience, my crowd. Here's we've got bad hair dude in here. What's up, bro? And he's super excited to be at the show. So this is pretty typical for like the floor or the mosh pit of a stadium. I have a target here so that I can kind of control what everybody's looking at. And this is great when you've got, maybe your focal point is, the singer is down on the very front of the stage, but, maybe he's, kind of way over here on the B stage, or, maybe you want to focus on, the singer over here and she's, on this other side platform. And so you can make sure that everybody's kind of looking in the right way. Or if you've got this kind of wraparound audience situation, you can make sure that everybody is going to be kind of looking into center. So that's cool. So how do we set this whole thing, up? Let's kind of start from the beginning here. So let's go ahead and just turn off some of this stuff here. So I just started out with this dude here, right? He's called Cheer01. And I've made sure that his axis is at his feet. That's just going to make things kind of easier for us. In fact, we'll get rid of this and we'll get rid of this, and we're just going to start, pretty clean here. Again, I like to go filter and turn off the work plane so that I'm not looking at it here. And so what I've done is I've drawn a polygon here, probably using the polygon pen tool. And this shape basically conforms to, this is the area that I want to, kind of fill with audience. And so, you're just making this kind of flat polygon on the ground here that, fits in around your barricade and, the sides of your arena or whatever it is. So, whoops, I'm screwing it up. So we've got this shape here that just reflects, kind of the floor of our area. So, and then I've got the dude. So let's go ahead and add him to a cloner. So we'll put him in, and he's going to default to grid like we expect. And we're going to change this to object. And then now it's looking for an object. So I've just called this guide, hide me, modified me to change audience shape. I'm going to take this, and in the cloner, with the cloner active, I'm going to drag and drop this into the object. And here we get a whole bunch of people who have collapsed. They're raging against the machine here. So, all right, so let's go back to the cloner. So first thing we got to do is fix these guys. And this is going to be one of those transform situations where, depending on which one of these, there we go. Whoa. So let's set this to -90. Yours may be different. It all depends on, who your figure is and what's happening. And so right now what's happening is we've got 20 of these dudes here, and we'll set over to render instance, and they're being distributed along the surface. So that's great. So we just up this number and we get, kind of more of a crowd going in here. Now, again, you have to be careful because, and maybe it doesn't matter, but, you can start to get overlapping geometry here. Like these guys are looking a little Siamese. So you just have to be careful. Lots of times the audience is like really dark and, you kind of can't see. You just see like the edges of them. And so, you can get away with that. But here's the problem is that these guys are all now kind of facing different directions, and we need everybody to be aligned because, we want to put like a singer over here. So I've just made this target here. This is literally just a spline that says the word target on it. That's it. There's nothing else kind of going on here. I chose this because it's a non-rendering object, right? It's a spline. It's not really geometry. So it won't render. So that's great. So now going back to the cloner here, we need to add another MoGraph tag. We're coming back to this. And so I'm going to go here to MoGraph effector. And this time we're going to choose target. And so when we do that now, we've added, right? So we look here in the effectors, we've added this target. And then if we click on the target effector to bring up its attributes, now it's looking for a target object. So we have to say, hey, this is the target. So basically the clones now, they're all ready for a target, but we have to tell it what that target is inside the target effector. So I'm going to grab the word target and I'm going to drag this down the target object. And the minute we do that, you're going to see that everybody gets into line and dun, 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 they're totally angled in the wrong direction. So everybody's backwards. Why is that? It's kind of working, but a few things are happening. They're all backwards and it looks like they're kind of leaning forward a little bit here. So we have to just make a few adjustments here. So I'm going to come back to our target effector, and I'm going to choose reverse heading. I don't know why this is, but for some reason, my people are usually backwards. If you check reverse heading, it's just going to make everybody kind of spin around. So that's cool. And now we're using pitch here. And so what this means is, like, if our target were to, kind of go up and over, everybody's going to kind of lay down. Like, so this is great if you're, I don't know, maybe if you're doing like a David Byrne show. It's kind of fun. But we really want our people to stay upright. We just care about their kind of left to right. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to uncheck use pitch. We don't want to use pitch. So that way, the only thing that's going to be affected now here is, if we're moving stuff this way. And that's it. So, you can, and this thing, once we get into rendering, this we can hide. We don't even need to see this, which is great. And then you can just, if you make adjustments, you'll see, this will update on the fly. It's all real time and parametric. And so, as we add more kind of floor space here, obviously we need to add more clones in here to, kind of up our numbers. And then, I would, if I was having trouble with overlap, which it certainly looks like, what's going on there, then we definitely want to come in here and say, push apart. And so then what happens is, then we start to get people into more, kind of realistic situations here. Whoops, keep doing that. And so there you go. So this is, and then obviously I would populate this with multiple people, not just cheer one, but, I would put in like 8 different figures and it would just randomize the order of those. And then, finally, the last thing we would do here is let's go ahead and add one more effector here. We'll go with randomize. And I don't really want to, randomize my my position, though sometimes I do randomize Y a little bit. It depends on if we're seeing the feed or not, but it can just help you get that effect of like kind of multiple, height going on there. But we definitely want to, kind of spin our rotation a little bit so that, maybe everybody's not exactly in the same position. It looks weird with one master object here. Once you start, multiplying the different kind of, numbers of bodies in here and the different shapes of bodies, then, it starts to look, really great. And then we hide that. And that's it. So there you go. This has gone on far too long, but I think you get the idea. And so, the cloner and just good old instances here, these are great and really powerful. And, it really is just like the symbol system inside of Vectorworks, but with a lot more control and kind of, a lot more power. All right. Hopefully that helps you out. Again, if you watch the Getting Geometry from Vectorworks into Cinema tutorial and the whole kind of why is my symbol now hidden at 0, 0 and there's an instance, this should kind of set you straight a little bit about what's happening. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in the next tutorial.